My billionaire ex-partner stole my technology and mocked me as a charity case. But he didn't realize the portfolio he just shredded contained a digital virus designed to erase his entire empire by sunrise. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but in the sterile, glass-walled boardroom of Vane International, it felt like being burned alive. I stood there, my palms sweating against the cheap fabric of my off-the-rack suit, clutching a leather portfolio that contained 3 years of my life. Across from me sat Julian Vane, a man whose name was synonymous with unbreakable. He didn't just own the logistics industry, he was the industry. To Julian, I wasn't a competitor. I wasn't even a nuisance. I was a punchline. "Let me get this straight, Elias," Julian said, leaning back in his Italian leather chair. He didn't look at my presentation. Instead, he flicked a speck of imaginary dust off his $5,000 cufflinks. "You want me to invest in a decentralized shipping grid powered by an algorithm that doesn't even have a patent yet. You're asking for $10 million to fund a dream that sounds like a sci-fi novel written by a middle schooler." The room erupted in a chorus of polite, practiced chuckles from his board of directors, men and women who had long ago traded their souls for a seat at Julian's table. I felt the heat rising in my neck. This wasn't just a business pitch. Julian and I had gone to the same university. 10 years ago, we were supposed to be partners. We had shared a dorm room, shared pizzas, and shared the original sketches of the technology he now used to rule the market. But while I was in the library perfecting the math, Julian was in the dean's office, charming his way into a legacy scholarship and eventually stealing the blueprint for our first prototype. He had launched Vane International using my work, rebranded as his own, and then used his father's connections to bury me under a mountain of non-disclosure agreements and legal threats. "It's not just a dream, Julian," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The Aegis system would reduce global carbon emissions by 40% and cut delivery times in half by removing the need for your centralized hubs. It's the future. Your current model is a dinosaur. It's bloated, it's inefficient, and it's vulnerable." Julian's smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned into chips of ice. He stood up, walking slowly around the table until he was inches from me. He was taller, better fed, and radiated the kind of confidence that only comes from never being told no. He reached out and tapped my chest with a manicured finger. "The future is whatever I say it is, Elias. You were a charity case in college, and you're a charity case now. You come in here with your graphs and your vision, but you're forgetting the most important rule of the world. Power doesn't care about being efficient. Power cares about control. I control the ports. I control the ships. I control the people. And you control a laptop in a studio apartment that smells like ramen noodles." He took my portfolio from the table. For a second, I thought he might actually look at it. Instead, he walked over to the paper shredder in the corner. He dropped my life's work into the slot, watching with a smirk as the pages were reduced to confetti. "Consider this a favor," Julian whispered so only I could hear. "Stop dreaming, Elias. Go find a nice, quiet job at a post office. It's more your speed. If I ever see your face in this building again, I won't just mock you, I'll ruin you. I'll make sure you can't get a job flipping burgers." He gestured to the security guards at the door. I was escorted out of the building, the laughter of the boardroom ringing in my ears like a funeral bell. As I stood on the sidewalk of downtown Manhattan, the cold rain beginning to soak through my jacket, I looked up at the Vane International skyscraper. It was a monument to theft and arrogance. To the world, Julian Vane was a titan. To me, he was a thief who had forgotten that every empire, no matter how vast, is built on a foundation, and foundations can be cracked. I walked 12 blocks to the subway, my mind spinning. Julian thought I was there to beg for money. He thought I was desperate, and I was, but not for his investment. I had known he would reject me. I had known he would shred those papers. What he didn't know was that the portfolio I handed him had a thin, flexible RFID chip embedded in the spine. A chip that, once brought inside the air-gapped boardroom of Vane International, had spent 20 minutes silently pinging the company's internal server, looking for a very specific backdoor. Back in my cramped apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at my desk, the blue light of 3 monitors illuminating the room. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't looking for money. I was looking for the Ouroboros file, the hidden ledger that every corporation of that size keeps to hide the grease that moves their wheels. Hours bled into the night. My eyes ached, but I couldn't stop. I found the entry point. Julian's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He believed his security was as untouchable as he was. But as I peeled back the layers of encrypted data, I realized the situation was far worse than I had imagined. Julian wasn't just a thief, he was a gambler. Vane International wasn't just bloated, it was a hollow shell. He had over-leveraged the company's assets to fund a massive secret acquisition of a tech rival, and he had used the pension funds of 50,000 employees as collateral. I stared at the screen, the magnitude of what I was seeing finally sinking in. If this information went public, the stock would plummet to zero. The empire would vanish overnight. But there was something else. A line of code that shouldn't have been there. It was a digital kill switch, a piece of malware that was actively draining the company's liquidity into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Someone was already destroying Julian Vane from the inside. I leaned back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had wanted to be the one to bring him down, to see him crawl, but someone had beaten me to the punch. I looked at the destination of the offshore funds. The account name was encrypted, but the digital signature was hauntingly familiar. It was a signature I hadn't seen in a decade. It was the same coding style as the prototype Julian had stolen from me. Just then, my phone buzzed on the desk. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello? You shouldn't have gone to the office today, Elias," a voice whispered. It was a woman's voice, sharp and cold as a razor blade. "You almost tripped the silent alarm I spent 6 months bypassing." "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The person who is going to make sure Julian Vane loses everything by sunrise," she said. "But there's a problem. Julian just found out about the breach, and he thinks it was you. He sent his fixers to your apartment. You have exactly 3 minutes to leave before they arrive." As she spoke, I heard the heavy sound of a black SUV screeching to a halt on the street 3 floors below. Then, the unmistakable thud of the building's front door being kicked open. I didn't wait to hear the rest. Panic, cold and sharp, jolted through my veins. I grabbed my primary external drive, the one containing the encrypted Ouroboros data, and shoved it into my laptop bag. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped my phone. I didn't have time to pack clothes or mementos. In the world I had just entered, those things were weights that would only sink me. I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots hitting the stairs. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a pre-war walk-up with creaky floorboards and paper-thin walls. I could hear them, 3 of them at least, moving with a terrifying, synchronized speed. They weren't police. Police announced themselves. These men were silent save for the sound of their equipment clinking against their tactical vests. I bolted for the window leading to the fire escape. The rusted iron groaned as I threw it open, the freezing rain lashing at my face. I stepped out onto the slick metal grating just as I heard the front door of my apartment splinter off its hinges. A flash of light, a tactical flashlight, swept across the room, illuminating the spot where I had been sitting seconds before. "He's on the fire escape," a voice barked. I didn't look back. I scrambled down the metal stairs, my shoes slipping on the wet iron. I reached the 2nd floor landing and leaped over the railing, catching the ladder that led to the alleyway. It slid down with a deafening screech of metal on metal. I hit the pavement hard, the shock vibrating through my teeth, and took off running toward the labyrinth of the meatpacking district. "Elias, take the left into the service tunnel," the woman's voice commanded from my earpiece. I had forgotten I was still on the call. "Who are you?" I wheezed, my lungs burning in the damp night air. "How do you know where I am?" "I'm the reason you're still breathing. Take the left. Now." I dived into a narrow, dimly lit service tunnel behind a row of high-end restaurants. A black sedan was idling at the far end, its headlights off. As I approached, the rear door swung open. "Get in if you want to see Julian fall," the voice said, no longer through the phone, but from the shadows of the car's interior. I dove into the back seat, and the car roared to life before I could even close the door. We fishtailed out of the alley, the tires screaming against the asphalt. I looked out the back window and saw the three fixers emerge from the tunnel, their figures silhouetted by the streetlights. They didn't chase us on foot. One of them was already speaking into a radio, while another pointed toward our retreating car. I turned to the person sitting next to me. She was silhouetted by the passing city lights, sharp features, cropped dark hair, and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in a week. "Sarah?" I whispered, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. Sarah Vance. She was the third member of our university group, the brilliant coder who had disappeared shortly after Julian stole our prototype. I had thought she'd taken a payout and moved to Europe. I'd spent years hating her for abandoning me to fight Julian alone. "Hello, Elias," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She was staring at a ruggedized laptop on her lap, her fingers dancing across the keys. "You always were the slow one. I've been inside Vane International's systems for 18 months. I was 3 hours away from triggering the final collapse when you decided to play hero and walk into Julian's office with a tracker." I wanted to look him in the eye. I snapped, my fear momentarily replaced by a flare of anger. He stole everything from us. I wanted him to know it was me who took it back. "Well, congratulations," she said, turning the screen toward me. "He knows, and now he has a reason to kill you that has nothing to do with a college grudge. Look." The screen showed a live feed of the global markets. Vane International's stock ticker, which usually sat at a rock-solid $210 per share, was flickering. It was down to $185, then $170. It was a bloodbath in slow motion. But below the ticker was a window showing a series of encrypted communications. "Julian isn't just losing money, Elias," Sarah explained. "He's been laundering funds for a private military conglomerate called Ironwood. He used our shipping grid to move more than just consumer goods. He moved black box hardware, illegal tech, untraceable weapons, things that don't exist on any manifest." My stomach turned. I saw the Ouroboros file. I saw the offshore transfers. "You saw the surface," Sarah corrected. "The kill switch I planted wasn't just to drain his accounts. It was designed to leak his entire client list to the Department of Justice at midnight. But Julian found the leak because of your sloppy RFID ping. He's panicked. He's not just trying to save his money anymore. He's trying to erase the evidence. And currently, the only evidence that can link him directly to the Ironwood transfers is on the drive in your bag." I looked down at my bag, suddenly feeling like I was holding a live grenade. If the DOJ gets this, he goes to prison for life. "If Ironwood gets to you first, there won't be a trial," Sarah said grimly. We pulled into a parking garage beneath a nondescript apartment complex in Queens. Sarah led me through a maze of corridors to a burn apartment, a place that smelled of stale coffee and electronic ozone. Wall-to-wall monitors displayed data streams that would make a NASA engineer weep. "Stay here," she commanded. "I need to finish the encryption bypass. If we don't trigger the leak by dawn, Julian will have enough time to scrub the secondary servers and pin the entire laundering operation on a rogue employee. Guess who he's already drafted the press release for?" She tapped a key, and a document appeared on the main monitor. It was a draft from Vane International's legal department. The headline read, "Former Associate Elias Thorne, identified as mastermind behind systemic embezzlement and illegal arms trafficking." They weren't just going to ruin me. They were going to make me the greatest villain in corporate history. I sat on a crate, my head in my hands, listening to the hum of the servers. Hours passed. The sun began to bleed a pale, sickly gray over the New York skyline. On the news, the first reports were breaking. Vane International in freefall. CEO Julian Vane releases statement on internal sabotage. "It's done," Sarah said, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "The leak is live. The DOJ has the files. Julian is finished." I stood up, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see him in handcuffs. I turned toward the television, waiting for the breaking news banner that would signal the end of the Vane era. But the news didn't show an arrest. It showed Julian Vane standing on the steps of his building, surrounded by a swarm of reporters. He didn't look like a man whose empire had crumbled. He looked relieved. He held up a hand for silence, a small, predatory smile playing on his lips. "I have just been informed," Julian told the cameras, "that the individual responsible for the breach, Elias Thorne, has been apprehended. More importantly, we have recovered the stolen assets. But there is a further development. My team has discovered that Mr. Thorne wasn't working alone. He was working for a foreign entity to destabilize the U.S. logistics infrastructure." "What is he talking about?" I whispered, looking at Sarah. Sarah wasn't looking at the TV. She was looking at her laptop, her face turning ashen. "Elias, the leak. It's not the Ouroboros file." "What do you mean?" "The data I just sent to the DOJ. It's been swapped," she stammered, her fingers flying over the keys. "Julian didn't just find the leak. He hijacked it. The file we just sent isn't evidence of his crimes. It's a digital signature that links your laptop and this IP address to a terrorist server in Eastern Europe." Before I could process the horror of what she was saying, the sound of a helicopter roared directly over the building. A searchlight cut through the window, blinding us. Then my phone chimed. A video call from Julian. I answered it with trembling fingers. Julian's face filled the screen. He was sitting in the back of a limousine sipping scotch. "You really should have taken the job at the post office, Elias," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Did you really think I built this empire without a back door to my own back doors? You and Sarah just gave me the perfect scapegoat for 20 years of my father's debts. The world doesn't see a thief anymore. They see a patriot who caught a traitor." "You won't get away with this," I spat. "I already have," Julian said, "but I'm a generous man. I'll give you one chance to live. Look out the window, Elias. Tell me what you see." I looked out. Below us, the street was swarming with black SUVs, but they weren't the fixers. They were tactical teams with FBI emblazoned on their backs. "They have orders to shoot on sight," Julian whispered. "Unless, of course, you give me the one thing Sarah doesn't know you have. The red ledger hidden in the physical spine of that portfolio I shredded yesterday. Oh, don't look so surprised. I know you didn't just bring an RFID chip. You brought the original encryption keys. Give them to me, and I'll tell the FEDs you're an informant. If not..." The door to the apartment crashed open, but it wasn't the FBI. It was a man in a gray suit with a silenced pistol. He didn't point it at me. He pointed it at Sarah. "The keys, Elias," Julian said through the phone, "or Sarah dies and you spend the rest of your life in a black site." The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the cooling fans and the distant rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the FBI helicopter circling above. The man in the gray suit didn't blink. His silenced pistol was leveled at Sarah's temple with a terrifying, professional stillness. Sarah, usually so sharp and defiant, looked small. Her breath was coming in shallow hitches, her eyes fixed on me, pleading and terrified. On the phone screen, Julian Vane took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch. He looked like a god watching an anthill burn. "Tick-tock, Elias," Julian whispered. "The FBI is already in the lobby. They think they're here to take down a domestic terror cell. If Miller pulls that trigger, you'll be found standing over the body of your accomplice with a hard drive full of state secrets. There won't even be a trial. You'll just..." disappear. My mind was a blur of static. The red ledger. He was talking about the physical encryption keys I'd developed back in college, the ones he hadn't been able to crack when he stole the original prototype. He thought I'd hidden them in the leather binding of the portfolio I'd brought to his office. He thought I was that sentimental, that predictable. "The portfolio is in the shredder, Julian," I said, my voice cracking. "You watched it go through yourself. If the keys were in there, they're confetti now." Julian chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "I'm not an idiot, Elias. I had my security team sift through the waste bin before the ink was even dry on your visitor badge. The leather was empty, which means you still have them. You're wearing the same suit you wore to my office. They're in your pocket, or they're in that bag. Give them to Miller, and I'll give the order to let you walk out the back door." I looked at the bag on the floor. I looked at the hitman. Then I looked at Sarah. I didn't have the physical keys. I had never made physical keys. The red ledger wasn't a piece of hardware. It was a sequence of prime numbers derived from the heartbeat of the original server we built in our dorm. It was something only I knew, something I had committed to memory 10 years ago and never written down. Julian's greed had blinded him. He was looking for a ghost in a leather binding, and that mistake was the only leverage I had left. "You want the keys?" I said, standing up slowly. Miller shifted his weight, the gun never wavering from Sarah. "They aren't in the bag, Julian, and they aren't in my pocket. They're in my head. You kill her, and you'll never see a dime of that Ironwood money. Your empire is crashing, your stock is zero, and without those offshore funds, your friends at Ironwood are going to come for your head next." Julian's smug expression faltered. A vein began to pulse in his forehead. He knew I was right. Without the keys to unlock the laundered billions, he was a dead man walking, regardless of whether I went to prison. "Miller!" Julian barked into the phone. "Check him." The hitman stepped forward, keeping the gun trained on Sarah with one hand while using the other to pat me down. He was brutal, his hands slamming into my ribs, tearing at my pockets. He found nothing but my wallet and a pack of gum. He kicked my laptop bag over, spilling the contents onto the floor. Cables, a portable battery, my external drive, nothing else. "He's clean," Miller rasped. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "Where are they, Elias?" Julian's voice was no longer smooth. It was a snarl. "Tell me, or I swear I'll have him take her eyes out before he kills her." "I'll give you the first half of the sequence," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. "But only after Sarah is out of this building. She walks or the sequence dies with me." "Elias, don't," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "He won't let us go. He can't." "Shut up," Miller hissed, jamming the barrel of the gun harder against her skin. Julian stared at me through the screen, his eyes searching mine for a bluff. He was a predator, and he was cornered. That made him more dangerous than ever. "Fine," Julian said. "Miller, take her to the service elevator. Lock her in. Once Elias gives me the sequence and I verify it, you can drop her at the subway. But if the numbers are wrong, you go back and finish them both." Miller grabbed Sarah by the arm, hauling her toward the door. She looked back at me, her face a mask of horror. I tried to project a confidence I didn't feel. I needed her out of the room. I needed her away from the immediate line of fire. As the door slammed shut behind them, I was alone in the dark apartment with the blue light of the monitors and Julian's face on my phone. "Start talking," Julian commanded. I began to recite a string of 48 digits. They were meaningless, a combination of my childhood phone number and the zip code of our old university. But I said them with the steady, practiced cadence of a man revealing a holy relic. Julian was typing frantically on a laptop off-screen, likely inputting them into his decryption software. "Wait," Julian said, his brow furrowing. "The checksum isn't hitting. These are garbage." "It's the first half of a dual-layer key, Julian," I lied, my mind racing. "The second half only works if it's entered from a terminal with an authorized MAC address, like the one in your private office. You have to be there to finish it." "I am in my office, you arrogant little—" Suddenly, the apartment floor shook. A massive explosion rocked the building from below. The FBI had begun their breach, but it wasn't the front door. They had used a C4 charge on the structural supports of the parking garage. Smoke began to curl under the apartment door. "What was that?" Julian shouted. "The end of the line," I said, grabbing my laptop from the floor. "The FBI is here, Julian, and Sarah isn't in that elevator. She's a better hacker than you ever were." At that exact moment, the screens in the room shifted. The data streams Sarah had been working on didn't show the terrorist leak anymore. They showed a live map of Julian's own internal network. A red bar was filling up. System override, 98%, 99%. "What are you doing?" Julian screamed. "I didn't give you a key, Julian," I said, a grim smile finally touching my lips. "I gave you a command string. While you were busy typing those numbers into your terminal, you were actually bypassing your own firewall. Sarah didn't get caught in your trap. She used me as a Trojan horse to get you to open the door from the inside." On the screen, Julian's office lights began to flicker. In the background, I could hear the sound of his heavy oak door locking automatically. "The red ledger isn't money, Julian," I said. "It's a wipe command. It's deleting everything. Every account, every shell company, every piece of evidence of your existence. In 5 minutes, Vane International won't just be bankrupt. It will be erased from the digital world." Julian's face went pale. He turned away from the camera, shouting for his security, but his voice was drowned out by a new sound coming from his end of the line, the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots in his hallway. But they weren't the FBI. "Julian?" I asked, leaning closer to the phone. "Who's at your door?" Julian looked back at the camera, his eyes wide with a primal, soul-deep terror I had never seen before. "The Ironwood fixers," he whispered. "They think I'm the one stealing the money. Elias, wait, stop the wipe. I can give you anything. I'll give you the company. Just tell them it wasn't me." "Mock my dreams again, Julian," I said coldly. "Tell me again how power is about control." I hung up. The apartment door burst open. I braced myself for the FBI, for the end of my life. But it wasn't the FEDs, it was Sarah, her face covered in soot, clutching a tactical radio she'd stripped from Miller. "We have to go, now," she yelled over the roar of the helicopter. "The FBI isn't here for us, Elias. They're here for the Ironwood data. But there's someone else in the building." "Who?" I asked, grabbing my bag. She pointed to the monitors. A single window had popped up, bypassing her override. It was a simple text command, glowing in a blood-red font. "Recovery initiated. Target Elias Thorne. Status, acquire or eliminate." The signature at the bottom of the screen wasn't Vane International. It wasn't even Ironwood. It was a logo I hadn't seen in 10 years. The logo of the government agency that had funded our original research before Julian stole it. "The project was never ours, Elias," Sarah whispered, the blood draining from her face. "We were just the test subjects, and they're coming to collect their property." Behind her, the wall of the apartment exploded outward as a breach charge detonated, and 3 figures in matte black armor bearing no insignias stepped through the smoke. The matte black figures moved with a terrifying, fluid precision that Julian's hired thugs couldn't dream of. They didn't shout commands or demand surrender. They simply raised suppressed rifles, the red dots of their laser sights dancing across the smoke-filled room like hungry spirits. "Get down!" Sarah screamed, tackling me behind the heavy oak desk just as the first volley of rounds shattered the monitors above our heads. Glass rained down on us, the screens we had just used to dismantle an empire exploding into a million jagged shards. The sound of the suppressed shots was a rhythmic thud, 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 like a heartbeat skipping. "Sarah, the data!" I gasped, clutching my bag to my chest. "If they get the drive—" "They don't want the drive, Elias," she hissed, her fingers fumbling with a small metallic sphere she'd pulled from her tactical vest. "They want the source. They want us. We're the only ones who can bridge the gap between the Aegis algorithm and the live grid." She twisted the sphere and rolled it across the floor. A second later, a high-pitched whine filled the room, followed by a blinding flash of white light and a wave of static that made my teeth ache. An EMP. Every electronic device in the room, including the Black Ops team's high-tech visors, died instantly. "Run!" Sarah yelled. We didn't go for the door. We went for the hole they had blown in the wall. In the confusion of the digital blackout, we scrambled over the rubble and onto the maintenance catwalk that hugged the exterior of the building. The wind whipped at my hair, the cold rain now a freezing sleet that stung my skin. 30 stories below, Queens was a blur of orange streetlights and moving cars, oblivious to the war being waged in the shadows above. We sprinted along the narrow metal grating. Behind us, I heard the heavy clatter of boots. The EMP wouldn't keep them down for long. They were trained to hunt in the dark. "In here!" Sarah ducked into an open ventilation shaft. We crawled through the cramped, galvanized steel tunnel, the smell of dust and old grease filling my lungs. My knees were raw, my hands bleeding from the jagged edges of the metal, but the adrenaline kept the pain at bay. "Who are they, Sarah?" I whispered as we reached a junction. "You said the project was never ours. What did we actually build?" Sarah stopped, her back against the vibrating metal wall. In the dim light filtering through the slats, her eyes looked hollow. "We thought we were building a way to optimize the world, Elias. Efficient shipping, less waste, a perfect grid. But the agency, Project Chimera, they didn't want efficiency. They wanted a predictive engine. They wanted an algorithm that could anticipate the movement of every person, every resource, and every weapon on the planet before it even happened. Our shipping grid was just the skeleton. The Aegis system is the nervous system for a global police state." My stomach turned. Everything I had worked for, every dream Julian had mocked, was a blueprint for a cage. "Julian knew?" I asked. "Julian was the middleman," she said. "He was the one who could bridge the corporate and the covert. He stole it because they told him he'd be the one holding the leash. But Julian was too greedy, too loud. He started using the grid for his own side hustles, the ironwood deals. He became a liability. That's why I was sent in 18 months ago, not just to take him down, but to secure the code before he accidentally gave it to the wrong bidder." "Wait," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "You were sent in? By who, Sarah? If you're not working for yourself, who are you working for?" She didn't answer. She just looked at her watch. "The extraction point is the Roosevelt Island tram. If we make it across the river, I have a contact who can get us out of the country." We dropped out of the vent into a service stairwell 5 floors down. We descended in a frantic, stumbling blur, hitting the ground floor just as a black van screeched into the alleyway. I expected more gunfire, but the door slid open to reveal a familiar face. It was Miller, Julian's hitman. His face was bruised, his suit jacket torn, and he was holding a blood-stained bandage to his side. He didn't point a gun at us. Instead, he gestured frantically to the interior of the van. "Get in," he rasped. "The Ironwood teams are hitting Julian's penthouse. The feds are locking down the bridges. This is the only way out." "Why are you helping us?" I demanded, staying back. "Because Julian is a dead man, and he's the only one who has the offshore codes to pay me," Miller said, his voice dripping with venom. "But you have the red ledger in your head. You're my new retirement fund. Now get in before the Chimera teams find us." I looked at Sarah. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. We dove into the van, and Miller floored it, the tires smoking as we roared out of the alley. The drive was a nightmare of sirens and shadows. The city felt like it was closing in. On the radio, news reports were descending into chaos. Vane International's collapse had triggered a flash crash in the global markets. Riots were breaking out at the ports where Julian's automated systems had suddenly locked up, freezing billions of dollars in cargo. The world was grinding to a halt because of a few lines of code I had written in a library 10 years ago. "Look," Sarah whispered, pointing to a tablet in the back of the van. It was a live feed of Julian's office. The door had finally been breached. I expected to see him being led out in handcuffs, or perhaps a body bag. Instead, the office was empty. The window, the massive floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the city, was shattered. "He jumped?" I asked, a strange mix of horror and relief washing over me. "No," Miller said, checking his rearview mirror. "Look at the floor." The camera panned down. There was no body, but there was a trail of blood leading away from the desk toward a hidden wall panel that had been slid open. Julian hadn't just built a back door into his software, he had built one into his life. Suddenly, the van's internal speakers crackled to life. It wasn't a radio broadcast. It was a direct patch. "Elias." The voice was weak, wheezing, but unmistakably Julian's. "You think you won. You think you stripped me of everything. But you forgot one thing about power, Elias. It's not just about control. It's about being the only one who knows where the bodies are buried." "Where are you, Julian?" I shouted. "I'm at the source," he whispered. "The original server room. The one we built in the basement of the old physics building. The agency is here, Elias. They're standing right in front of me, and they've made me a very interesting offer." A cold dread settled in my chest. The old physics building wasn't just a memory. It was where the master key, the physical hardware that anchored the entire Aegis system, was housed in a deep-level vault. If the agency had Julian, and Julian had the location of the vault. "He's giving them the bypass," Sarah breathed, her face turning white. "If they get the master key, the wipe command we sent won't matter. They can reset the system and lock us out forever. They'll have total control." "Miller, turn the car around," I yelled. "We have to get to the university." "Too late," Miller said, his eyes fixed on the mirror. I looked back. 2 sleek, silent drones were hovering just feet behind our rear bumper. They weren't firing. They were waiting. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message from an unknown number. I opened it, my heart stopping as I read the words. "We have your mother, Elias, the university, 10 minutes, or the system isn't the only thing that gets erased." I looked at Sarah, then at Miller. The van was trapped, the drones were overhead, and my rival, the man I had just destroyed, was currently negotiating my life for his empire. Then the van's engine coughed and died. Every light on the dashboard went black. "They've remote-killed the vehicle," Miller growled, reaching for his gun. The side door was ripped off its hinges by a hydraulic claw. A man stepped into the light, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my apartment. He wasn't a soldier. He was the man I had seen in the background of every university photo from 10 years ago, the dean of admissions who had given Julian his scholarship. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice as warm and terrifying as a funeral hearth. "The director would like a word, and I believe you have something that belongs to us." He held up a tablet. It showed a live feed of a darkened room. My mother was sitting in a chair, a red dot centered perfectly on her forehead, and standing behind her, a bandage wrapped around his head and a look of pure, murderous triumph in his eyes, was Julian Vane. The dean didn't speak as he led us through the familiar ivy-covered halls of our old university. The air here usually smelled of old books and hope, but tonight it reeked of ozone and wet pavement. We were taken deep into the bowels of the physics building, past the labs where Sarah and I had pulled all-nighters, down to a sub-basement that didn't appear on any student maps. The heavy steel door at the end of the corridor groaned open, revealing a room that looked like a high-tech tomb. In the center sat the Aegis core, the original server stack we had built with salvaged parts and genius. It was humming, a low-frequency vibration that I felt in my marrow. Standing next to the server, illuminated by the harsh white glow of overhead LED strips, was Julian. He looked like a ghost. His expensive suit was shredded, his face bruised and pale, but his eyes were burning with a frantic, feverish light. He was holding a gun to the back of my mother's head. She was tied to a chair, her eyes wide with terror, but she remained silent. "Elias," Julian rasped, "you're late for the reunion." The dean stepped forward, his voice cold and institutional. "Enough, Julian. Mr. Thorne is here to provide the master key. Once the system is stabilized and the wipe is reversed, we can discuss your future." "My future?" Julian laughed, a jagged, broken sound. "You've already replaced me. I see the way you look at him. You want the creator, not the salesman. But you forget, I'm the one with the leverage." He pressed the barrel of the gun harder against my mother's temple. "The sequence, Elias. Now, or I paint this server room with her." I looked at my mother. She looked back at me, and in her eyes I saw the same strength that had raised me in that studio apartment on a waitress's tips. She didn't nod, didn't beg. She just looked at me as if to say, "Do what you have to do." I stepped toward the terminal. Sarah reached out, her hand brushing my arm, a silent warning. She knew what I was about to do. She knew that the red ledger wasn't a key to unlock the system. It was a key to end it. "Julian," I said, my voice echoing in the sterile room, "you always said I was a dreamer. You mocked me for wanting to build something that was efficient and fair. You told me power was about control. You were right. But you forgot the most basic rule of engineering. Every system has a limit." "Shut up and type!" Julian screamed. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't enter the sequence of numbers I'd given him earlier. I entered a string of commands that reached back into the very foundation of the code, the parts Julian had stolen but never understood. I accessed the Aegis Heart, a recursive loop I'd hidden in the architecture a decade ago. It was designed to trigger only if the system was ever used to aggregate more than 51% of global logistics data. It was a fail-safe against a monopoly, a fail-safe against a man like Julian. "What are you doing?" the dean demanded, stepping closer to the screen. "That's not the decryption protocol." "No," I said, my heart steady for the first time in years. "It's the audit." On the monitors, the maps of the world began to flicker, the red lines of the global police state, the tracking of every ship and every person began to turn green. Then they began to dissolve. "I'm releasing the source code to the public," I said. "In 30 seconds, the Aegis algorithm will be open source. Every port, every shipping company, every individual will have the same access to the grid. There will be no central hub, no master key, no control." "Stop him!" the dean shouted to the Black Ops team. But it was too late. I hit the final enter key. The room erupted in a cacophony of alarms. The server stack began to whine as it pushed the massive data packets out to every corner of the internet. The agency's Project Chimera was evaporating in real time. They couldn't stop the leak because the leak was the system itself. Julian froze. He saw his last bit of leverage, the value of the code, vanishing into the ether. He looked at the screen, then at me, the realization dawning on him. He wasn't a titan anymore. He wasn't even a middleman. He was just a man with a gun in a room full of people who no longer needed him. "You ruined it," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "You destroyed it all. My money, the Ironwood accounts, it's all gone. There's nothing left." "There's the truth, Julian," I said. The dean looked at the screens, his face a mask of pure fury. "You've made yourself a very busy man, Mr. Thorne. You'll be running for the rest of your life." He signaled his team. "We're leaving. This facility is compromised." The agency didn't care about Julian. They didn't even care about my mother anymore. They were focused on damage control, fleeing before the digital trail led back to them. They moved with mechanical efficiency, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had arrived. In the sudden silence of the room, Julian stood alone. He dropped the gun. It clattered against the concrete floor, a pathetic sound. He sank to his knees, his hands shaking, his face buried in his palms. My mother stood up, shaking off her ties, and walked toward me. I held her tight, the relief washing over me like a tidal wave. I looked down at Julian. The man who had stolen my life's work, who had lived in a glass palace while I lived in the dirt, who had mocked my dreams as the delusions of a charity case. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw the man behind the mask. He was small. He was terrified. He was a thief who had finally run out of things to steal. "Elias," he sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of my coat. "Please, you have to help me. Ironwood. They're coming. They think I have the money. They'll kill me. You have to tell them. Give me a backdoor, just one offshore account. Anything. I'll give you whatever you want. I'll tell the world it was all your idea. I'll give you the credit." He was groveling at my feet, his forehead touching the cold floor. The unbreakable Julian Vane was begging for mercy from the man he had called a punchline. "I don't want your credit, Julian," I said, looking down at him with a cold, clear pity. "And I don't have any back doors. I built a system that was fair. That means it's fair for you, too. You have exactly what everyone else has now, a clean slate and the consequences of your actions." "Please," he shrieked as I turned to walk away. "Elias, I'm a dead man. Don't leave me here." I didn't look back. Sarah, my mother, and I walked out of the physics building and into the cool morning air. The sun was beginning to rise over the New York skyline. On the streets, people were checking their phones, confused by the sudden influx of data, the news of the Vane leak already beginning to trend globally. Julian's empire hadn't just crumbled, it had been dismantled and given back to the people he tried to own. He would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for the men he'd cheated to find him in the shadows. As we walked away from the university, Sarah looked at me and smiled. "So, what now, Elias? You're the man who broke the world." I looked at the horizon, at the city that felt a little less like a cage and a little more like a home. "Now," I said, "I think I'll go get some ramen. I've always liked the smell of it.